We've talked about the war on the poor many times. It's one of the actual real wars in this country, in contrast to, for example, the war on Christmas, which happens to not be real, or the war on Christianity, which happens to not be real, or the war on the rich, which happens to not be real. The war on the poor is a real thing. And last week, the Department of Justice argued as much in a statement of interest that it filed in a pretty obscure case in Boise, Idaho, which could end up affecting how cities regulate and punish homelessness. Boise, like many cities, has an ordinance that bans sleeping or camping in public places, which of course directly targets homeless people. But such laws, like the Department of Justice says, effectively criminalize homelessness in situations where people have no place to sleep. The Department of Justice found, quote, when adequate shelter space exists, individuals have a choice about whether or not to sleep in public. However, when adequate shelter space does not exist, there is no meaningful distinction between the status of being homeless and the conduct of sleeping in public. Sleeping is a life-sustaining activity. It must occur at some time and in some place. If you have nowhere to go, as is the case if there are not shelters available or space in shelters available, then the enforcement of these anti-camping or anti-sleeping in public ordinances effectively criminalizes being homeless. Obviously, the Department of Justice is pointing to the Eighth Amendment protection against cruel and unusual punishment, which would suggest that banning homeless people from sleeping in public is flat out unconstitutional. We will see what happens with this. This could be really, really big, as Eric Tars, who's a senior attorney for the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, says. However, I want to issue this caveat, which was something I read from Terrence McCoy in the Washington Post. This will not really stop the criminalization of homelessness for two reasons. McCoy says, first of all, cities are actively expanding other laws that target the homeless population. This includes everything from increasing prohibitions on panhandling, for example, or loitering, or loafing, or vagrancy. The number of bans on those activities has increased drastically. And yes, we can say, fine, you can sleep in public because sleeping is something people have to do at some point at some place. But the other activities are still going to be enforced, at least it appears they will be. And number two, there is this other element of stigma around homelessness in this country. And even if you pass a law saying, or even if you say you cannot pass laws banning sleeping in public, that's a great step. But ultimately, it is not going to change the real and significant stigma that exists in the United States around homelessness. This is a huge, huge war. One battle here, the one about sleeping in public, is maybe going in the right direction. I hope that it is. I've actually been feeling particularly guilty and bad lately when I see people panhandling. Particularly, it's so hot now in the heat. And the worst part of it is really the feeling that I can do very little. I think the best thing I can do is, on this program, continue talking about poverty, continue talking about how so many of the poverty issues we have, including hunger, are optional issues, and hoping to catalyze change in that way. Because even if I go to my bank account, raid my bank account of as much money as I can and start handing $20 to every homeless person I see, even their lives are only going to be impacted temporarily by that $20. And it is not going to impact the broad problem, which is the stigma and lack of attention being paid to homelessness. So I've been talking to a lot of people about it when I drive by with whoever it is I'm driving with, someone who's panhandling in the heat. They clearly look beaten down. And I don't know. How do you deal with that? What feelings do you have? I know some people are very good at sort of shutting it out and saying, hey, listen, there's people on all parts of the economic spectrum, and there's going to be poverty, period, and sort of disconnecting from it. I don't know what it is, but it's becoming increasingly tougher for me to do that.